But for more election analysis and predictions of what will happen on June 6th, we go to Agustín Barrios Gomez, member of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations. And as mentioned before, one of my favorite guests on the show. Thanks so much for joining us, Agustín. Agustín, tell me, how would you feel today at this moment if you were AMLO?
I just want to be clear. I want one of those sock things that you showed at the beginning. And two,
right?
Two, I actually love the Dorito shell taco. Sorry, I just had to say that. Viva,
I don't know why would it do bad in Mexico? Like Chipotle too. I think they would be. I mean, I know that. I don't
think they tried hard enough, to be frank. I'm gonna quote the Chihuahua from the Taco Bell commercials of the 1990s. Yo quiero Taco Bell.
All right. Let's get back to the election. Tell me how you feel if you were AMLO right now.
Getting back to serious things. So you were asking me how I would be feeling if I were AMLO right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that it? Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because, of course, he is his own universe, right? Mm-hmm. We are just bit players in a play that in a drama that is going on in his head, and so it's very difficult to understand the anger that comes up when one of his positions is challenged. And right now, after having spent a lot of time really being very sure of having even a super majority, after what happened with the metro, after people actually physically saw like a manifestation of the poor government decisions that have been made over the years by him and his team, and the fact that he can't point to anybody and say that was somebody else's fault. And I mean, that was very directly related to him and his team over the last many years. And so that was sort of, a turning point in this election. I think that made all the difference. And I think the numbers are really changing. I mean, even this attempt to put rapist in the governorship of Guerrero, and then, him actually saying that instead of him, okay, so he couldn't be there, but because the INE said that he didn't even report his spending, so he puts his daughter there in this massive exercise in cynicism. But right. Apparently she's going down in the polls, and apparently she is now not necessarily favored to win, which is, the Torita is no longer going to be the placeholder for the Toro, which is exciting, quite frankly.
Amazing. But Agustín, you know what these guys think, because you were a member of their party back in the day when you were a congressman.
I wasn't directly a member because I never joined, but I certainly was put on the ballot by the PRD.
Okay.
It wasn't Morena at the time, and the PRD was a much bigger tent. Right, the PRD had a lot of different public figures, everybody from Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas through to people like Marcelo Ebrard, people like López Obrador, sure. And people like the Chuchos and all of these different people that were going on at the time. Right. It hadn't become a cult of personality, which it became under Morena. Right. But yes, I certainly do know these people, and I was a congressman for Mexico City.
Right. We've been covering this on the show, the Salgado case, for a number of shows. And we know he's lost a lot of support, even in his own party, by women who were promised that women would be elevated during his tenure here. What's in his head? Was there kind of like a bet with Salgado? Was his his best friend? Why did AMLO pull all his support in him when it's been really damaging for him?
Well, again, I mean, he has based his entire, everything, his political life, on this culture of identity, and he has basically said, what I say goes, and if I want a rapist to be the governor of a state, then that's what's going to happen. And there's a very long period of help Salgado Macedonio has been a major figure in Guerrero politics for a long, long time. And these are the people who have stuck by Andrés Manuel López Obrador throughout his political life. So at the end, the nature of these beasts, the nature of the beast, of these types of figures, of these cults of personality, of these authoritarian figures, is that they value loyalty over capacity. They value loyalty over ability. And that is why you see the issues that come around with the metro. That is why you see the fact that Mexico was downgraded by the FAA, because there's not really a belief in government. In fact, actually, there's a disdain for expertise. There's the disdain with respect to actually knowing what you're doing, and which is not actually, it's not a Mexican thing. I mean, we saw it under the Trump administration. If you want to read an excellent book, read Michael Lewis's The Fifth Risk. It's a fantastic book, and it talks about the dangers of these cults of personality basically destroying government from within, such that government doesn't have the capacity to do the most basic things, like, for example, public transportation, or in the case of the United States, the case that he cites in The Fifth Risk is actually the Department of Energy, which the former governor of Texas, Perry, actually thought was a department related to energy, when in reality, the Department of Energy is actually mostly focused on something that's just a wee bit more important, which is the entire nuclear stockpile of the United States, and things like that, right? So really you have the destruction of the inability or the destruction of the ability of the government to actually deal with these very, very serious issues, because they don't understand them and they disdain anything that has to do with knowledge.
Right. So let's go back to the metro situation, because the polling that I was citing before we started this program was done around the time of the metro disaster. So I don't know if there was really understanding the fallout and the impact. And before the show, you and I had a conversation, and what I heard from you is that you're even expecting his party not even to win the majority. I mean, that is pretty big. What does that look like in a post in the next 3 years, if his party and of course all of his alliance parties too, right? Is that my understanding that they will not make the majority? What does that look like for this country?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's very important to understand some very basic things. So what you have is that you have the PAN, the PRI, and the PRD. They have come together and they are making a huge effort to have a single candidate. It's very important for people who do vote in these elections that if they do want to vote against Morena, that they have to choose one of these three parties. They have to choose either the PRD, either the PAN, or the PRI. Usually it's going to be the same candidate, but either one of those three needs to be crossed out. They cannot choose all three, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is to be aware of the entire, of the fact that the ballot is mostly going to be dedicated to parties that are basically stooges of Morena. And so if you vote for anybody who is not PAN, PRI, or PRD, you will be voting for Morena, which is, very much up to you, but just understand that. So, I was mentioning to you, Dan, off the air, that my first job was as brand manager at Procter & Gamble. And one of the things that we talked about was, the shelf space that you get, right? What they call fronts, right? Faces on the shelf. And so that real estate on the shelf makes a lot of the benefit in terms of actual market share. Right. And so that's basically what Morena has done. Like López Obrador has made this collection of parties such that they actually own most of the real estate on the ballot. And that's part of the psychological thing that's going on. So it's PAN PRD or PAN PRD or PRI for the opposition parties. Just one crossed out. You do not cross more than one under any circumstances. You have to cross only one. And that's really the only opposition. In the case of Movimiento Ciudadano, Movimiento is a very difficult, it's a tough nut to crack, right? Because on the one hand, you've got Samuel Garcia, who you just showed in his video. He's a kid. I mean, he's like 32, if I remember correctly, 31. And he's been a phenomenon, and he's running under the Movimiento Ciudadano flag. And I certainly think that he's going, he's got the chutzpah, he's got the oomph, he's got the presence to be his own man, I believe, in conjunction with his wife, who's an incredibly famous blogger. I mean, she's got millions and millions of followers. She's a superpower unto herself. But beyond that, I think Movimiento Ciudadano, my worry, despite the fact that they do have very good kind of candidates, including Samuel, including Salomon Chertorivsky, my worry with them is that Dante Delgado, who's basically the owner of the party, has been shown to be very, let's just say, malleable. and flexible with respect to Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. And so it's very difficult to think that they would actually create a proper opposition to the regime at a moment in which it's not really about public policy. It is very much about saving Mexico from dictatorial, authoritarian rule. I mean, it could not be. It would be impossible to overstate the importance of this election.
Absolutely. So what is your prediction here? How many seats do you think that Morena and their affiliated parties are going to take in this election?
Well, I mean, Mexico built the most sophisticated electoral system on the planet. And I know this for a fact. Mexicans
he's
don't usually realize that.
Right, and which he's going to try to dismantle, right, if they win.
Well, he's already done a lot to dismantle it by starving them of the funds that they need. Right. But having said that, there's still the skeleton necessary, I believe, to actually do the elections the way that they have done. I mean, you have to understand, for these elections, they recruit about 2 to 3 million civilian volunteers chosen at random, train them over the scope of like 3 months, and then it's actually a civilian run, but very well orchestrated organization. I mean, it's an incredibly, like I said, it's the most sophisticated system in the world, and I know this for a fact. And when the Americans organized the elections, the first elections after the invasion of Iraq, for example, it was the IFE, which was, the INE at the time, the Instituto Federal Electoral, which went over to Baghdad to train the election authorities over there at the petition of the Americans. I mean, that's how sophisticated the Mexican system is.
Come on, the American system is much more sophisticated. I mean, Arizona and Florida, these are like incredible systems with like.
No, the American system, and let me just say this because I was on Breitbart, believe it or not, talking about.
You were on Breitbart.
Yeah, I was.
I can't have anybody on Breitbart on the show, guys. Where's my producer? What did you do, Edgar?
I was invited by the New Hampshire Tea Party during the Republican convention up there in 2015, and I spoke to Patriot XM Radio and all these guys. And they were like,
Mexican? What do you mean? He's white. He's got glasses. He looks smart, right?
Yeah, exactly. He speaks American. So one of the things that they said was that we want a voter ID system, and I hear that Mexico has one. We want just sort of slipping that in. And I said, well, look, there's a huge difference, because if what you want from voter ID is to disenfranchise people, that's not what happened in Mexico. Mexico basically started from a position of no trust. And so they had to build this entire apparatus around to create trust. Right. The American system was built on trust. And I think that there's a lot of very positive things about that. Of course, I don't think that the conditions are the same anymore, but I do believe that you can't disqualify that it was built on trust, that, and that there were some very positive things about the American system that obviously need to change right now. But if you want to go to a system like Mexico's, you have to be willing to spend the billions of dollars to make sure that even the old lady, in the Sierra of Guerrero or Chihuahua, in the middle of nowhere, gets her voter registration ID, and that it's free, and that it's accessible, and that they actually get it. Everybody gets it. And I think that Mexico did an incredible job.
I'll never forget going to really never forget going to Veracruz in 2003. I drove my car from Reynosa to Veracruz, and it was an election day, and I would drive to these small towns and see lines and lines and lines of people in these small villages ready to vote. And so that's really promising. It's really good to hear. But Agustin, I don't want you to skirt this question. We only have a couple of minutes left, but tell me your prediction. What do you think? How many seats do you think Morena and his affiliated parties are going to win?
I mean, okay, so I'm hoping that I'm hoping that they do lose the majority, and that they're not going to get a super majority. I think that's a done deal. But I'm hoping that they lose a simple majority, even with their allies. I'm expecting that the Mexican voter really isn't taken in by the politics of hate, by the politics of division, by the politics of identity. I'm hoping that that they will feel in their bones what is actually happening on the ground, which is the fact that the country really is falling apart. And that's saying a lot, because the country wasn't all that well put together in the first place, you know,
Right.
in the early 21st century. So to see those very few areas of Mexico which actually used to work, you know, if you're the mother of a kid who stopped receiving after AMLO came to power, you know, cancer medicine, and has had to watch her son die after years of actually receiving it. If you are the, you know, the family member of somebody who's walking into one of these clinics of the EAMS, or you're a mother who can no longer drop her child off at childcare, which is actually something that had been achieved before, I mean, that really has to hurt. And I'm hoping that that message of all of those people who have been affected, or the 24 people who passed away in the metro disaster, I'm hoping that their voices are heard.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
we'll see.
Yeah. And I've been talking about this too on the show, that anybody who's watching that doesn't vote and was really mad and said that it was negligence, but in a democracy, these people, we have to all be participatory and vote. And if we don't hold the elected officials accountable for their work, they're going to do whatever they want. And I think that's
the worst thing that can happen in a democracy, Dan, and I've seen it happening among Republicans in the U.S., is the divorce between what happens at the polls and what happens on the ground.
Yeah.
So once that accountability is no longer there, that's how democracies die.
Yeah, absolutely. Agustin, always a pleasure to have you on. We could be talking for another half hour if we could,
my friend.
But I hope to have you come back on the show soon, and good luck, and hopefully some of your predictions will come true. Agustín Barrios Gomez. And
congratulations, by the way, Dan.
Thank you so much. Member of the Comexi, also a former anchor of in ADN 40, former diputado, and many other things. It's a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.